to the World Affairs. I'm your host, Marina Kufa, and I want to welcome a very special guest today, Vic Gerami, who is an Armenian American journalist and also LGBTQ activist, as well radio show producer, and also the Blunt Post with Vic. How are you, Vic?
I'm well. Yourself?
Thank you so much. Thank you for joining the show. So tell us a little bit about yourself and also about your radio show and your journey to journalism.
Sure. So it's been a long journey, as you said. Um, the Blunt Post is my online publication, bluntpost.com, and my radio show has the same name. It's called the Blunt Post with Vic on public radio KPFK 90.7 FM. It's sort of a national news and politics show every Monday mornings at 6 a.m. Pacific time. I cover sort of headline news nationally, regionally, locally, and I interview members of Congress and other high-profile public figures, elected officials, etc. And on my publication, The Blunt Post, I cover news, opinion, commentary, social justice, and a little bit of fun stuff, travel, some travel, lifestyle, things like that, LGBTQ activism. And and I write freelance as a contributor for probably over 20 different publications, newspapers and magazines. Most of them are national here in the US, a few of them are international. Yeah.
What sparked your passion for journalism?
I went to school for theater arts. I have a degree in theater arts, but what my professors preferred in my work was my writing. In fact, I had a professor that sort of, she championed my writing. She was sort of, she saw, I guess, a gift in me. And at the time, I wasn't ready for it. But as I got older, sort of the enthusiasm for theater as a profession sort of went away, and came my passion for media and journalism. And we live in a world where, I don't know, I think most of us can't ignore all that's happening. So there's a lot to report, and journalists are, I think, more important now than ever, especially with so many nations and rogue governments and dictators limiting freedom of the press and suppressing information, and flooding the world with disinformation and propaganda, not just with press, but social media, etc. So, I'm just fascinated with the whole industry, and hopefully contributing a little bit to this world.
Right. So tell me, where have you traveled as a journalist, and a little bit about your discoveries? And you're also in the film industry now. So if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Sure. Travel, I've traveled to some, incredible places, both as an individual and as a journalist. I think Armenia, which we can talk about later, of course, but also throughout Europe, England, France, Germany, Austria, been to Turkey, Canada, parts of the Middle East. I've done different types of writings. Sometimes I jump around from writing from, social justice to politics to news to travel sometimes too. So I've been lucky to get to travel a lot, especially internationally, for what I do. Filmmaking, this was a Motherland documentary feature film, is my first one. So I didn't go to formal filmmaking school. So this was my venture into filmmaking, but the film Motherland is really a journalistic investigative documentary. So it's really a combination of what I do in terms of a journalist, and just reporting facts and telling a story of these people and what happened.
We're going to shift towards the world. And I would like to know, What do you think is the main cause of the world hunger today?
You know, I can go into this. I think most people can talk hours about this, but it comes down to um, most of the world doesn't care. I'm just going to be blunt.
Hmm.
My publication is called The Blunt Post because I like to be blunt and just
Hmm.
really get to. Most people don't care. They want to see, they don't see it. It doesn't affect their daily life, and they want to have nothing to do with it. In fact, they're bothered if someone reminds them that millions of children go to bed hungry throughout the world. It's because we don't care. And I say that because I know that there's the myth that we don't have the resources, the money, the food, the production. That's all just a myth. None of that is true. It's because we don't want to. If we wanted to, no one would go hungry. And I know that for a fact. But we don't. We globally don't. And the cycle continues and the band plays on.
What do you think is going to happen now, since there's, the war in Ukraine and all this wheat production is being, uh, you know, uh, it's not moving forward. So what do you think is going to happen now?
Yeah, I wish I had a crystal ball, but
Yeah.
I do know that we're definitely entering a tough phase again. I think recession is inevitable in the US, and we know that when the US goes into a recession, the world suffers. To a greater degree, the world goes into a recession. It is cyclical. Every 15 years we go through this, but this one could be really bad. We're seeing some signs now. Of course, that coupled with what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, and the fact that
Hmm.
using resources from Russia is not an option anymore for good reason. Um, the people that suffer, that always suffer, are the ones that are going to suffer the most again. The poor, the working class, people in developing nations. The rich, in any situation, usually get richer,
Yeah.
especially, so it's a real strange dichotomy to watch. Like, for the last several years, this sort of real estate boom and all the multi-million dollar mansions that get sold and reported, and then you look at the reality of the real world and how people are living, and this will continue. I don't see any sign of any positive sign. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't see any positive sign. I see that we're globally entering a tough phase.
What do you think? How should be the competition between U.S. and China in the Middle East, for example?
I believe in the slogan that live life on life's terms, meaning that accept the reality and work with what you have and what's happening. Up until 10 years ago, we were still determined to push for domestic manufacturing, which obviously is the ideal, and that we keep as much manufacturing as we can in the US. I think in the last 5 to 10 years, we've sort of accepted that competing with China and their industry is virtually impossible. Look, globalization is here and it's staying. And China, has emerged in the last 15, 20 years, especially last 10 to 15 years, as a global power. And so, it's I condemn China's human rights record. I condemn a lot of what's happening in China, the atrocious human rights and crimes against humanity happening there. But that aside, in terms of China becoming a major competitor for US, some will go as far as to say that we're colonized by China due to the trillions that we owe China. That's a reality that we must face, and I think we are, and I think the US is ready for it. I mean, I think we shouldn't underestimate ourselves. I don't think the Chinese are definitely a force to be reckoned with, but we can't underestimate our own talent, our own industries, and where we are globally in our standing, US is still the world's most powerful nation.
Well, the technology is so advanced over there. We just launched not that long ago 5G. Now China is developing 6G. What's your thoughts about that?
As a technology, who can criticize it, right? As long as it's not used um, but as long as it's used for the right reasons. It's competition. If their scientists are able to develop, whether it's a 6G or anything else, good for them. It keeps her on our toes, our own scientists and engineers and such. We're still, to look at it, just one technology would be, wouldn't make sense. You'd have to put it in context, and when you put it in context, there's so much that the US develops and is sort of the pioneer of it. I think China is just now emerging. So if they succeeded in 6G, good for them.
What do you think are the possible opportunities, challenges, and options for Middle Eastern countries?
I have a different perspective on Middle East. I have to sort of, we also have to take our own inventory and see our part in it. Our foreign policy in the Middle East has been very sort of selective, right? So we go out to the world and say, we're here to create democracies and nurture and develop democratic nations and topple autocrats and such, and help you to bring up your human rights and etc. But we do it when it's most of the time we do it if our self-interest is satisfied. So that selective and inconsistent policy is one of the problems facing the Middle East and Middle East's relationship with the US.
What do you think, did US benefit the change in Arab world after the Arab Spring?
Look, to answer that, I have to sort of go back and look at the big picture. Big picture of consistent of two things. One is three things actually. One is the military-industrial complex. After oil, the military-industrial complex is the largest industry in the world by far. So what that means is that war is profitable, and there are many, many, many people who push for war all the time. The highest levels, lobbyists, manufacturers, corporations, because they profit from it. Second part is, and this isn't just exclusive to the US, it's exclusive to a lot of colonial European nations, whether it's Great Britain or Germany or France or whatnot through the centuries, is chaos in nations where you have interest can sometimes be beneficial to you, and democracy could actually work against you. So we also have a habit of sort of, we get happy when an autocratic nation or autocratic dictator is toppled, like in Libya, for example, during the onset of Arab Spring. But then we don't do anything to foster that democracy. We just sort of see where our benefits are, and we sort of take what we can, and we split. Arab Spring, I think perhaps an expert or scholar can answer that better. Some of the benefits include, obviously, that some of the dictators of some of these countries were toppled. But when we in Western Europe, when the world's leaders, the ones that claim to be leaders, and also the international bodies like UN, European Union, Council of Europe, OSCE, when they don't help these nations to get on the right path, what happens is you just get another oligarch, you get another dictator that replaces them, and nothing changes. So it's hard to really have a tangible answer for the benefits of Arab Spring. As a concept, of course, it's always great to see that people rise up as a democracy and demand their rights, their human rights, and say we will not take abuse and human rights violations anymore. But but the benefits are kind of debatable of what happened.
What do you think is the most important challenge for US security globally?
That too is a kind of a two-part answer I have for that. So from a larger picture, I think that the military-industrial complex will tell us that we are in imminent danger at any point, and that we either need to spend more and more and more on military, or actually preemptively go to war, right? Because it's profitable. Afghanistan, we spent over 2.6 trillion with a T in Afghanistan in 20 years. Now tell me, has anything changed? And are we any more secure than we were 20 years ago? So who benefited? It's all the contractors. It's the military industrial complex. It's all those companies like Halliburton and Dick Cheney's other companies that benefited with all the contracts, the military contracts, and all the money that funneled in. So I know it doesn't really answer your question. So part of it is I think that we are a lot more secure than we think we are. We have more US military bases around the world than any other nation. In fact, if you combined most other nations, they wouldn't have the kind of military bases that we have. We certainly have more military power than any other nation, including Russia. But on a practical level, our security, there are two things that I think are eminent. One is homegrown terrorism. It's radicalized people within the US, as we see every few weeks, months, people who take out a machine gun and go to schools and shoot children and people and malls and this and that. So that's a major threat. And as we grow as a nation and hopefully become more progressive, that threat can potentially be even greater, because these radicalized people have ideology that doesn't really, it doesn't mesh with democracy much. So I think that's one of the biggest ones. And if we really look at how many people have died from these mass shootings just in the last 20 years, it's a huge number. It's a huge number.
What do you think the US defense priority should be in 2022?
Well, we have to continue, without overreacting and without sort of expanding our military-industrial complex, but we obviously have to stay competitive with Russia and China and other emerging nations. Of course, we have to keep our eye on, North Korea and such. And I think this isn't some sort of new revelation or anything special that I'm saying. I mean, we're already doing this. I think, I mean, I always revert back to, we are spending way more than we need to on defense. We can be a lot more strategic. We don't need so many military bases in parts of the world where there are no imminent threats, but we have them. So it's kind of a big picture look at our military plan and our foreign policy and what that entails, because we are already, we have our eye on the biggest threats. And, Russia is certainly a nation to watch out for. Putin is pretty unpredictable, as he sort of proved to us with how far he took Ukraine. I don't think most people expected him to go as far as he did. So some of it is just really wait and see.
So what do you think is the biggest obstacle for the US and China to expand relationships?
Well, the US is still in defensive mode with China. We sort of don't want to accept that they have emerged as a world power, that their market and their economy is a force to be reckoned with, and they have given us a run for our money, you know. And I think there's more resistance from us, but at the same time, the Chinese are also very suspicious. China is not exactly a democracy, so you know we have to continue working with what we have, um, and not antagonize China. We owe a lot of money to China. Um, and as far as like on a smaller level of just their, you know, their innovations and their sort of their global reach, it's inevitable. But I have to say this though, when U.S. decides not to get involved selectively, China wins or other nations win because there's a vacuum. Now, we went into Afghanistan after 9/11 and we spent, as I said, 2.6 trillion in 20 years. But the nation that profited the most from that was China, because China was able to go into Afghanistan and get a lot of their natural resources. Afghanistan is a nation with immense natural resources that are mostly untapped. So I don't think we were strategic there. Whenever we decide not to get involved, it leaves vacuum for someone else to come in and assert their power.
You think about the latest verdict regarding Roe versus Wade?
It's appalling. It's unbelievable. It's disturbing. I don't know what other words I can say that others haven't already. If you asked me that Roe versus Wade would be reversed, you know, last year, 2 years ago, 5 years ago, I would have said you're crazy. But, you know, there you have it. The Supreme Court did it. The Supreme Court that was handpicked by Republican presidents, conservative ones, some who lied about their stance on Roe versus Wade. And now they have reversed it, essentially telling women that others, non-women, get to decide what happens to your body, to your reproductive organs, and make decisions for you. Is that a free country? And yet we sort of go, hoo-ha, free country, freedom, blah, 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 blah. But yet we took away freedom from women. That's exactly what happened. We actually took the rights of women away from them. No one should make those decisions for a woman or a young girl than the woman or the young girl and her parents. That is not something that any policymaker, any politician, organization, lobbyist, activist, me, or anyone else get to decide on. It's really disgusting. Even, you know, some of these states don't even care if the girl was raped, incest, none of that. It's really unfathomable. Like we're going backwards. We're going backwards in our democracy. We're going backwards in our human rights track. And unfortunately, there are other topics, other issues, I should say, that could be at risk. So we may see this. I mean, this Supreme Court's not going anywhere. So this could become a trend, and they could come after other groups, if you will, and other rights that we already have.
As a LGBTQ activist, you like to talk about marriage equality.
With you know, the years prior to marriage equality, for those who don't know, in 2008, then Mayor of San Francisco, Gavin Newsom, went rogue, you know, as an activist, and started to marry queer couples. And a series of events happened that led to legal marriage equality for LGBTQ people in the state of California. In 2008, about 10,000 couples got married. within 5 months. The right didn't like this, so they spent immense millions and millions of dollars to come up with Proposition 8, which was on the ballot in 2008, the year that President Obama was first elected. And what Proposition 8 did was it took away the legal right for California couples to marry, or California gay couples, if you will, or LGBTQ couples to marry, which is a horrendous slap in the face. And it left 10,000 couples who had already gotten married in limbo. Of course, this sort of became this big thing. And there were lawsuits that sort of continued all the way until in 2015, there was a Supreme Court landmark lawsuit that we won, in which I'm actually cited, and we were given marriage equality nationwide. Prior to that, a lot of states were sort of passing laws and making it legal. But in 2015, we finally had the right to marry as gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans couples, etc. And that's been the case ever since. Of course, now with the Supreme Court, with what they did with Roe versus Wade, they could easily put marriage equality. In fact, Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, has said that should be revisited as well. So a lot of queer activists are on alert about that because, well, who wants to go back? I mean, who wants to go back to being treated like a second-class citizen? As it is, in 30 states in the US today, as we are, you can get fired for being LGBTQ, believe it or not. So we don't have 100% rights and freedoms of our that our heterosexual counterparts enjoy. And now we are risking losing marriage equality as well. It's actually very interesting how all of this sort of came about. Of course, President Obama was a big champion for this, but he did it in a very pragmatic way. He did a lot of the great contributions that he made and advancements for LGBTQ rights. He did it in a very pragmatic way where he got the consensus and the blessing, if you will, of a lot of parties involved before anything happened. For years, the queer community wanted him to either do an executive order or some other way get rid of Don't Ask, Don't Tell or Defense of Marriage Act, both of which were passed during Bill Clinton. But the way he did it was he took his time, he got the blessing of his generals and policymakers and his governors and Congress, and he, of course, he overturned Don't Ask, Don't Tell and Defense of Marriage Act and championed marriage equality. He wasn't, necessarily responsible for that, but he actually did. He did send a message to the Supreme Court what his wishes were, that marriage equality passes. So, we're very grateful for President Obama for doing that.
So since you mentioned before about, all the violence that's going on, shooting, in a school, shooting in public places, what's your thoughts about firearm ownership?
Well, first I'll tell you about me, and I don't think my own personal choice is really that relevant. But I've lived in LA most of my life, and I've worked, traveled, played in all over LA and some of the toughest neighborhoods. And I've never touched a gun. I don't own a gun. I've never touched it. I've never had a need. I've never been in a situation where I needed one. So let's just sort of put that out there. Now,
and you've been to the most dangerous places during the war.
I'm kind of audacious, and well, part of it is because I don't think that these sort of risky neighborhoods are as risky as people would want you to believe, But anyways, what's important is this. Listen, we have a Second Amendment, and I have respect for that. Second Amendment, to me, is not owning a machine gun. It's not owning semi-automatic rifles. it's really absurd. Okay, it's one thing to own a gun to protect your family in case something happens. It's another thing when some of these shooters can go to a gun show and without much of a background check or anything, purchase guns and then go to schools and shoot them. So what we need is, what a lot of people have said, a meaningful reform in our gun laws. Not taking away people's guns, but a reform where the type of guns that are not necessary in the hands of civilians are taken away, or at least not, not so readily available. People, you always hear the other side say, but I need this type of gun because, if the feds break down my door, in the middle of the night, I want to be able to defend myself and family. And I'm thinking, if the DEA, the FBI, the CIA, break down your door in the middle of the night, what is anything going to protect you? If anything, it'll get you killed. Now, legally, you're supposed to have a gun in one side of the room and your bullets on the other. So you're trying to tell me that against maybe 12, 13, 20 people that are going to raid your house because of whatever you did or they think you did, that you're going to be able to defend your family. We need reform. But unfortunately, what happens is, every time there's a mass shooting, every politician comes out, they have all the right things to say, behind the podium, in the lights with, rhetoric and sound bites. And a couple of days later, everybody forgets and everyone goes back to their life. Why? Because the several reasons. One of them is the NRA is extremely powerful. The gun lobby is spending hundreds of millions making sure that these reforms don't happen. And also in a lot of states, a lot of these policymakers, members of Congress, et cetera, senators too, are, getting votes the next election cycle is more important than doing the right thing and championing gun reform. So they sell out America and the band plays on, the band plays on and it goes back to business as usual. And unfortunately, and this is sad because no one deserves to lose their child or anyone. I don't care where you're from. I don't care what your economic background is. But sometimes I think when we finally do something meaningful about our policy on guns is when one of these shootings happen in a very affluent neighborhood to the children of these high-profile public figures or super affluent people. Unfortunately, sometimes it takes something tragic like that for people to just move. Because so far, let's face it, so far, pretty much all of these shootings have happened to middle-class people or working-class people. So that's something to think about.
So what changes would you like to see in the world from now on?
Wow, it's $1 million question. Changes would be, I'm not usually a very spiritual person. I don't sort of have this sort of kumbaya kind of an attitude, but maybe this will sound like that. I just think that we're so caught up globally with our nationalities, ethnicities, creeds, religions, sexual orientation. There's a lot of divide and a lot of pain and a lot of conflict because of those absurd things. And the second thing is, I feel like, and it just could be that because I'm more in it, but I feel like there's this attitude of selfish, self-seeking, self-centered attitude that's emerged globally that reflects sometimes from individuals, sometimes groups, sometimes nations, where we have sort of this me, myself, and I sort of will do what's best for me and screw everybody else. And that sort of emanates from many different areas and spaces, if you will. what I'd like to see is sort of, listen, we're always going to have conflict and we're always going to have differences and we're always going to, uh, you know, uh, uh, have just sort of negative energy when it comes to people's differences. But I'd like to see some sort of a push toward realizing that we're sort of a global community, really. I don't think that there are races. I think there's only one race, and it's the human race. Um, that we're a global community, that cooperation is possible. Um, I don't know if we'll ever get to any kind of a global, 100% global peace or anything like that. But I don't think that we're doing anything to make it a little bit better. I think that we are, even some of our bigger agencies and bigger bodies that are supposed to be doing this, UN, European Union, NATO, Council of Europe, I think they have largely failed. NATO actually probably more so than the others, NATO and UN.
But do you think that maybe people are turning so selfish because of the survival?
Well, of course, yeah. I mean, it's, many different things. Well, it's part that, but I think it's more about greed.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about greed. I don't think there's a lack there. When you look at where a lot of that me, myself, and I comes from, it's not because someone is destitute. It's not from the impoverished parts of the world. It's not from impoverished people. The ones that have the most, the ones that that have the most to give. But greed becomes sort of a drug, a high for a lot of people. So yeah, I think greed has a lot more to do with it, and apathy, just plain apathy. One of those, hey, I have it made. I have my millions in the bank and my security for the rest of my life. Who cares if millions of Americans are susceptible to becoming homeless if they lose 3 paychecks, or millions of Americans don't have health care, even with Obamacare. They don't have health care because even that they can't afford. So there's no reason for the US to not be like nations like Denmark, Norway, Belgium, Iceland, Finland, Sweden, where they have universal health care, where they have free education, all the way to colleges and universities, where women get to have months off for maternity leave, and people get decent vacations, at least 5 weeks of vacations a year. There is zero reason why we, the most powerful and wealthiest nation in the world, cannot have that and better. But we don't want to. Not the people, but the people in power don't want to, because the status quo works for them. The status quo and of how things operate, it's fine with them. And the ones that have the power don't want that changed, and they spend a lot of money to make sure that doesn't happen with lobbying our policymakers.
So tell me, what are you going to be? What is going to be your next project since you finish your first film?
I have a project in mind, but I can't talk about it yet. It's still sort of developing. But I'm really not done with Motherland. The first phase of the film was to get it made. So, got made, premiered it, and now I'm doing private screenings around the nation. And so until we have a distributor and we can release it worldwide, my ongoing project is to get the film to be seen by as many people as possible, but especially by elected officials, policymakers, journalists, intellectuals, academics, scholars. That's really important to me, and that's what I'm doing right now. There's a screening in Glendale on August 4th. I've invited a lot of elected officials again to come see it. It's that's sort of like my next few months will be.
We'll be busy. I had people asking me, where can I see the movie?
Well, it's great. I love that there's so much interest. So the film hasn't been distributed yet, so they can't see
I can't
it
see
like
it yet.
at a streaming or anything like that. When that happens, of course, I'll let you know. So right now, the answer to that is you'd have to be in one of the cities where we're going to be screening, such as LA, Glendale, Boston, DC, New York, Philadelphia, and Detroit. But other than that, I would say have them wait. In the meantime, they can go to the film's website for information and upcoming dates and such, which is motherlanddoc.com. So it's motherlanddoc.com. They can also go to the Blunt Post website, which is thebluntpost.com, just TheBluntPost.com. And my show's on KPFK 90.7 FM. So it's kpfk.org, Monday mornings at 6 a.m. Yeah, those are the three ways that people can be in touch. So the film is on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. My personal social media, it's all Vic Gerami. So Insta is Vic Gerami, at Vic Gerami. Twitter is Vic Gerami. And Facebook, it's facebook.com/vic.gerami.
And tell me, who is supporting this film? Because so far you have a lot of official, a lot of people. It create a wow factor. So who is your biggest support?
Well, in terms of the film itself, so there's two types of support, right? So I had the support of 7 members of Congress who gave me interviews for the film, including Senator Bob Menendez, Congressman Adam Schiff, Congressman Frank Pallone, Congresswoman Jackie Speer, Congresswoman Katie Porter, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, and Congressman Brad Sherman. I also interviewed Baroness Cox, who's one of the highest ranking members of the British House of Lords, and elected officials in Armenia, activists, Azerbaijani activists, Israeli activists, and several other people, and also Council Member Paul Koretz here in LA. As far as support for the film, I had 10 people, 10 very generous individuals who backed the film financially, because films take a lot of money, and this film took about 1.5 years. Post-production was very expensive. So I was, lucky and grateful that these individuals came in and supported the film, never having seen my work, at least not film work, and said, sure, we'll come in as patrons and help to get this film made.
And of course, your amazing crew.
We have a very tight, small but tight knit crew. My producer, Henrik Vartanyan, who's a friend of mine of over 20 years. We have this great editor, Chris Damadian, who is just really incredible. And you know this in your industry, how important it is for your editor and you to be sort of speak each other's language and understand each other and sort of collaborate. And Chris and I have done that beautifully, I think. So I'm really grateful. Of course, there's other crew members. There's, people we hired both here in LA and also in Armenia locally. Everyone was just really incredible.
Well, it's amazing. Well, it's very difficult to mention everybody.
It is.
Right, it is. But there's a huge shout out to everybody who worked on that project. And Vic, I want to wish you all the best. Thank you so much for being my guest today. It's a true honor. And I'm looking forward to have you on the show again.
Thank you, Marina. I really appreciate it. It was my pleasure and a privilege.
Thank you so much.